It's 10 a.m. right here in Lagos, Nigeria. It's the first trading day of March and definitely the first trading day. That's the first trading week of March. Things are rolling on quite fast in this first quarter of 2025. Imagine we've knocked out about 2 months already. So a lot to look out for. Hope your portfolio is in good condition, so far. But definitely you should be watching your show to get tips on how to get that right investment in this markets that we're tracking so far. But let's start off with what's happening with oil now. We're seeing oil prices starting off quite upbeat for this month. Yeah, that's the first trading day this month, 0.5% for Brent, $73.17 a barrel. We're seeing, optimism with fuel demand, and that's propping up the prices there. US grade WTI, that's above that $70 psychological level just by 10 cents. It was below that the previous week, and so we're seeing some improvement there with the price. Two other stories now. Nigeria Renewable Energy targets and the United Nations Agency have set up a $500 million target, the fund to finance the rollout of so-called distributed renewable energy, such as solar home systems and mini-grids. The fund, backed by the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, that's the NSIA, and the UN Sustainable Energy for All organization, known as C4All, will be managed by Africa 50, an infrastructure investor establishment by the African Development Bank. Nigerian Pension Fund will also invest, and that's according to C4All's chief executive officer. And it's still earnings season. The earnings we're seeing for most of the listed companies, that's still rolling in. And the latest there we have for the NGX there, that's gross earnings, 103.2% up year on year. Pre-tax profit, 157.3% up. And final dividends there, that's £2 per share. Let's look at Dangote Cement now. They reported a profit before tax of 732.53 billion for the financial year ended December 31st, 2024. That's for Dangote Cement. You can put that up. We see about 32% increase from 2023. According to the reports and financial statements, the company's full year revenue that surged by 62.16% year on year to 3.58 trillion, driven by strong revenue from Nigeria, about 57% from the sale of cement and clinker there. So we're seeing revenue up 62%. Cost of sales, that's also up about 63.54%. Gross profit, 61% up, 1.9 trillion there. Profit after tax, that's 503 billion, up 10.47%. We see finance costs, that's up 125%. So definitely we'll see how investors react to this latest result. We're still expecting more results coming out from most of the listed companies. All right, let's get an outlook now on what to expect in the market. It's a brand new trading month, definitely, and we're expecting the March savings bond auction. We'll get the details sometime today for that. We've had the one for February and January so far, and now we have this one coming out. We'll get that today. Then FAC inflows, that's coming in. The one for January, that's expected into the market about 1.15 trillion naira. And analysts expect this inflow that would definitely saturate liquidity in the market. Then I believe tomorrow we should be getting earnings for Seplat Energy. I told you the earnings are still rolling in, and we're also getting dividends announcements. So the latest one, that's energy giant, Seplat. We're supposed to get that sometime tomorrow. We'll definitely be looking out for that. All right, let's get to our first conversation today. We're definitely looking at growing revenue in the country, and we see Nigeria, a country rich in culture, resources, and entrepreneurial spirit, stands at the cusp of an economic transformation. Driven by digital innovation with a rapidly growing population and an increasingly tech-savvy youth. The time is ripe for Nigeria to harness the full potential of its creative economy. Well, joining us now to discuss, we have Aisha Damu Algiers, is the DG of Center for Black and African Arts and civilization. Joining me via Zoom. Great to have you on the show. Good morning.
Hello, Mr. Williams. Good morning.
Good morning. I like the way you say
Thanks
Mr. Williams. Yeah, so,
instead of laddie, right?
Yeah, it's fine. I like it. So, we're in a situation where we're trying to, raise revenue. We're seeing the government there, trying to, get more ideas, at this time. We have a very incredible budget, for 2025. There's also a gap there that needs to be filled, and we need more revenue coming into the country. So, talk to me about what you've seen so far, with Nigeria's creative economy and how that's helping boost, revenue for the country.
Well, so far we have a lot of individuals that have been able to boost the economy. We're looking at Nollywood, music, fashion, all these different items have come together to help us boost revenue. I believe there was an expansion from a bit of the data we have from 8.4 trillion to around 10.1 trillion in the last 2023 to 2024. So we're seeing an expansion, but we also have a lot of it that is not recorded, right? So I can give an example of myself. For 20 years, I earned from the creative economy. And we want to see a boost in the creative, cultural, and tourism economy. So if you look at the renewed hope agenda of the president, 8-point plan of the Honorable Minister of Arts, Culture, Tourism, and Creative Economy, it's all targeted towards how do we boost this revenue generation and create jobs. So the difference is clear. From a lot of people, they assume it's just from music, but the trillions have been coming more from the Nollywood and the fashion space. So we're seeing a huge difference so far.
And talking about, the music and the revenue we're seeing from the music, no pun intended, but we're seeing a lot of Lamborghinis, going around with, most of our,
yes, it's been trending
our singers in Nigeria. They're buying Lamborghinis. It's, everyone gets a Lamborghini at this point. But we're looking at other cultures in Africa now. We see a couple of countries there. They're exporting, their cultural heritage, and that's, a tourism asset, for most of these countries. Do you think Nigeria is, have you seen any improvement, when it comes to, exporting our cultural heritage, or have we put that aside, or is it something that, we're starting to look at?
So I think there's a new renaissance. There's like a new build-up as to the culture. Being Nigeria is cool right now. Being a Nigerian is like cool. You're talking about these Lambos. Yes, we may have some excessive showcasing of wealth. And the beauty of that within the digital space is that it's actually boosting conversations where people are saying, are they taxing these people? What is happening with these monies? All of our money is going outside. So conversations are happening where people are actually thinking about it. And if you look at what the ministry is doing, they're building up initiatives, whether it's Screen Nigeria to showcase Nigeria everywhere with our film. We have a tax credit scheme for the film production to, of course, support people, because that's one of the major problems people in the film production space have been talking about. You look at the Creative Economy Development Fund, which was recently just announced, and that is like to build gaps within the infrastructure space. You also have the Creative and Tourism Infrastructure Corporation, right? All of these things are looking at how to fund the infrastructure, how to build the skills. I think I forgot one, which is the Creative Leap Accelerator Program. For us at CBAC, we have a Pan-African Indigenous Skill Development Program, because the plan is how do we actually export these services to the global community? Ahead of AFCFTA, for example, for those who know about AFCFTA, by the time Africa starts trade across our nations, how do we ensure Nigeria is at the forefront at pushing out these services? You look at the likes of Korea, they were very intentional with K-pop, K-beauty, K-drama. It wasn't something that just came up overnight. So we're seeing success stories globally that we have had organically. So now the government is on board. For the first time, we have a ministry that clearly specifically focuses on that. And I see, especially for someone who was part of the sector, I do have hope that we will grow.
And talking about, hope in growing, at this point. So What trends have you noticed, when it comes to, say, fashion, movies, cinema, and African art? What trends are you seeing so far when it comes to, exporting all of these to the outside world and getting in that much needed foreign exchange?
So I think one of the major things is just the same with our resources. The global community see the wealth, the beauty, the creativity. We're different. Nigerians are different. And I think that's one of the reasons we're able to constantly be the ones hyping ourselves in a way. And it gets very annoying for some. But Nigerians are very creative, and the global community are seeing that, and they're coming for our people. So what we need to do is to ensure that we also, as Nigerians, we're using these opportunities to create jobs within this sector, to ensure that the revenue also stays within the Nigerian space, because a lot of people end up having their money on the outside, right? Capital from outside, investments goes back out instead of staying within the sector. So I think one of the major trends is, regardless of whatever the sector is, we have investors coming in from the outside, constantly calling to say, okay, we need to come into this space. How do we get in there? How do we get the musicians? How do we get the fashion people? Within the film space alone, fashion has become a big deal, where you now have stylists that are creating for the films. You have stylists that are looking and researching. At CBAC, we have a lot of people coming in to research the kind of videos that we have in our archive. I know that is also happening at the National Film Corporation. You have, for example, NCAC have put together all the commissioners within the state to ensure we actually know what we have. Nigeria has been a country that has thrived without actually knowing 100%. We didn't have the data, but data is building up, and it's really, really exciting. The world is open for us. We just have to be ready to push the right opportunities out there. It's a global world now.
Yeah, it's definitely a global world. And, talking about foreign investors, we've been trying to woo some of these investors, showing that Nigeria is, ready for business. And we've seen the president, do that. So, with some of the foreign investors you've come in contact with, what would you say are some of their concerns, when it comes to, piling cash into the industry?
Well, obviously, sometimes they look at the insecurity situations. Other times they look at the instability of the dollar. They look at, what if something happens? Do we have the what's the word to use? Are we able to back them up if anything happens with their money or investments? And I think generally it's always a risk. For most people that have invested, they've made a lot more money than they would anywhere else. And that is where the IP policies come in. That's where the tourism policies come in, because these policies will ensure that everybody across board is making it. So far, it's been the investors enjoying more of it than the talent. So I think now we're also trying to fight to ensure that people who get to have the talent and are doing this are actually earning what they should compared to the rest of the world.
Right, and could you tell us some, success stories you've seen, so far, with some of our exports, going out when it comes to, fashion, movie, African art. What are you seeing?
Yes. So I think right now, if we look at even with our masters in the art scene, our masters, their prices now are being evaluated in millions. We're talking millions of euros, millions of dollars. If you come to fashion, it's the same. Just recently this week, I was on a Tokyo James show, and it has a connection to the Milan Fashion Show. You have people who are now doing events here and showcasing them globally. You have the likes of the makeup artists that are now selling across Africa. It's not just here. You have people selling on Amazon. We even have our local snacks being sold on Amazon, for example, Bonita, because we have to interconnect. Art isn't just about the painting and the talent. Sometimes our culture is embedded in that. And how do we package these cultures into packageable items for the world to see? So we do have a lot of successful stories, but how do we ensure that we keep them here? I think that is the main question. And that is the work that we are all trying to do within the ministry and the agencies.
Right. Talking about keeping, them here, I've seen a trend, lately with Adire. We're seeing,
Yes.
with baggy, you see some
Yes.
guys, they wear those baggy pants, with some
Yes.
T-shirts. So that's a fashion trend we're seeing so
Yes, it
far.
is.
But there's that issue when it comes to fabric production, because most of these fabrics are still, imported. So we're not getting the true
Imported,
value.
yes.
At this point. What's being done to, resurrect our production of the fabric production at this time?
Yes. So, creating these things can be very expensive. So when you have the likes of, for example, China being able to just create a print and print them in thousands to send them down. But what we're seeing now is the trend is that people want authentic. You can see me. I have this. It was made by a young man called Ebuka. And this was made by my sister. So you have people who are now they want the authentic indigenous way of how it was done. And we look at the cotton industry. Now, you see, this is where you have to also connect manufacturing to culture, right? Like I said earlier, you see the cotton industry is gone. It's basically maybe 5% of what it used to be. If we're able to boost that, you see it's connected still to agriculture. It's still connected to security. So there are many value chain connections that have to be fixed for these things to thrive. But what is beautiful right now is that people are proud to say, I have Akwete fabric, or I'm doing the Adire version, or I'm wearing the authentic Hausa fabric. Now they're incorporating it into the fashion. Even if they are importing stuff, you would still see pieces connecting to the foreign stuff. It's like a mixture of the two sides coming together. So I think by the time we are able to build the infrastructure needed, it would come so easily because the people already exist. There's a community right here in Lagos, Nigeria, Ikate, that they're making handmade fabric. And I visited the place. There are at least 12 countries working out of that space, as in 12 representatives, 12 different countries represented in that place, from Mali to Senegal, Burkina Faso, Benin Republic. Everybody has a piece in what they're doing and teaching in the space. So we need to boost more of that. And Nigerians also need to understand, as you're looking at these external brands and you're spending your money there, it's not going to grow. Ours will never grow. If you would prefer to buy fabric from Louis Vuitton, and then you have a Banker Kuku, for example, here in Nigeria, and nobody's supporting, they're not going to grow. So I think that pride should also come to holding these indigenous ways and say we are very, very proud of it, and we will invest in it and put our own money where our mouth is.
Right. And, it's
be a fashionista, but be a Nigerian and African one.
Yeah. I'm sure everybody wants to, buy Nigeria, at this point. Yes. But, it's quite interesting that, some of the indigenous producers here, their prices are even sometimes more expensive than the Louis Vuittons.
Yes, it is.
And they tell you it's because cost of production is high.
Exactly.
And, when we see, some of these textile production outfits that have, gone under now because there's no power. So at the end of the day, it still comes back to infrastructure. So
and our basics.
Yes. So what kind of conversations are you having, with that segment when it comes to providing, the infrastructure needed, when it comes to power?
That is needed.
So that people can actually produce, cheaper. What kind of conversations are you having with that ministry?
Yeah, so it's not just the ministry. Like, you have the CBN, Finance, Ministry of Trade, PEBEC. There's so many different aspects to it. We're looking at alternative power supplies. We're looking at hubs where it would reduce the cost of people. I know the minister wants to have hubs in every state in the country so that at least it helps to reduce some of the costs for the people who already have existing products. This should be rolled out hopefully very soon. I'm sure an announcement will come out soon based on that. But so these things are being thought about. But let's remember that this is also a new ministry in the sense, and we're looking at things differently. You actually have people heading the agencies that have been in this sector. So using me as an example, I've been a photographer, a creative artist, a filmmaker. So I'm able to bring insight on how we also suffered back in the day, because things are actually easier for a lot of people now. But looking at all of these things and having interministerial meetings within the Renewed Hope agenda, because it's not just one thing. Almost every sector in this country is affected by any other one failing. So if, for example, customs decides that they're not going to drop a certain amount to import some of the things that these people need, that is an increase in price. If you do not have electricity, that's an increase in price. The people themselves, they don't have health insurance. They don't have a scheme that helps them, deal with day-to-day life. The prices just keep going up. You, as an entrepreneur, if you're hiring people, you're basically taking care of them and their entire family. For those who've been through entrepreneurship in this country, it tends to be that way. So these are all the items that are on the table that we're working hard towards to find solutions. And like I said, gladly, I am having hope because I've been a part of the sector and I'm seeing the difference. People aren't suffering as much as we did. I remember it took me 7.5 years to buy the equipment that I needed to start my photography business. Now it's way easier. Sometimes you even have people throwing these things at you. They say, just bring your talent and come and use our equipment. So things are changing. But we really need to look into obviously boosting the security, the electricity, like I said, basics. Then skill development also. Our universities and schools, the school system has to change. We have to meet up to the global community. So you have the ministries, for example, coming up with schools of education that will focus on this more futuristic way of doing things instead of us being stuck to the old school paper type education system. Right. So there's a lot that is happening intergovernment-wise. And the beauty of it is we now have KPIs, the key performance indicators for each ministry that interconnect. Okay. And I think for the first time, we have that being done where every quarter people have to send their KPIs and then things are looked at to see, did we achieve or not? That didn't used to happen in the past. All right. Definitely hoping, for the very best, going forward that at some point we actually buy Nigeria. That's true Nigeria with products that are goods that are produced in Nigeria, not imported. We choose Nigeria. At this point. Thank you so much. That was Aisha Adamu. Thank you, Mr. Williams. This is the DG Center for Black and African Arts and Civilization. Thank you for coming on today. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, I'll take a break now. When we come back, we'll move to the next conversation. What's happening with Nigeria's supply chain? That's in a moment. Just stay with us. Back. Well, before we continue with the show, for our DSTV viewers, we're going to join a live coverage now in Adamawa State, and that's the REA State-to-State Roundtable Engagement. That's for the Rural Electrification Agency State-to-State Roundtable Engagement. But this continues on all other platforms. That's Business Morning, but that's for our DSTV viewers. But for our next conversation now, definitely we're looking at Nigeria's supply chain. We've had rebased inflation, and we brought our inflation numbers from a massive over 34% to about 24%. And we're also expecting rebased GDP numbers. That's for the Nigerian economy. We had the last one for Q4. Wasn't rebased, but it showed growth there for the Nigerian economy. What's X-ray now? What's playing out? And innovations coming up in Nigeria's supply chain. And we have to discuss that. Oluwatoyin Olaoye is a Chief Risk Officer at Vendor Credit. Great to have you on the show. Good morning.
Good morning, Ladi Williams.
Yeah, so, it's great to have you. So now we're seeing the data that's for January, the first inflation data for January with the rebased basket, which has brought down inflation to about 24.48%. And I'm wondering how this impacts, how you do business at this point. Is it something that's rosy, for you? Because it's a big drop. Some are saying don't call, this latest inflation number, a drop. But how does it really affect, Nigeria's supply chain?
Thanks again, Ladi, for having me on. Okay, so just to put a caveat there, the MBS has clarified that that's decline from 34 to 34.8, I think, to 24.4, right? Does not reflect a decrease in the general price level, right? They've just attributed the drop to a new base year. So what we've seen across board is that inflation has continued to climb sharply, right? Despite, and this is obviously due to the moves by the current administration with regards to ending subsidy and which has led to spikes across board. So things like prices of goods and services and generally led to difficulty across board for consumers. What we've seen in supply chain industries, there has been a rising cost of goods and services, so higher input costs, reducing purchasing power, imported inflation. Given Nigeria is largely dependent on imported products, right? We've seen in inflation that has spiraled because of this. There's also been disruptions in logistics and transportation. So across board, we've seen fuel price volatility, right? Delays in bringing in goods from the ports, and then rising warehousing costs. So these are just a few things that we've noticed, right, so far since inflation has died so early. And obviously, the hope is that as the administration continues to do things to bring inflation down, a lot of these costs that we're seeing that have spiraled will also come down.
Right, and definitely we're hoping for lower prices that we can actually feel the impacts at when we go to the markets. But it's all about what happens going forward. With this inflation data. It's rebased, at this point, but it's not about this data that we're seeing, right now. But what are you expecting, going forward? And, when it comes to the impact of inflation on, operations and, profits, what are you seeing going forward? Do you think inflation will tend upward, as we go along with this rebased data?
The idea is that it would flatline. Right. The expectation and the rule of thumb for most people going through inflationary pressures are that you tighten the belts. Everyone knows that. So we expect that a lot of companies, right, and a lot of industries who are in this space will then also retweak their strategies so that they can also help the consumers alleviate the pressures of inflation. So certain things like pricing strategies, right? You might see a value-based pricing or tiered pricing, depending on the product. A lot of companies will also be doing a lot of cost management. So things like cost analysis, supplier negotiations, diversification of suppliers also, right? So if they used to get their inputs from a particular supplier, right, you might now see a ask for a wider array of suppliers who can probably provide these inputs at a lower cost or at a competitive cost, basically.
And also, talking about the impact of energy, we've seen energy costs. That's talking about PMS, where we're seeing some kind of, downward play. When it comes, it depends on which refinery you're getting. Yes. Fuel from, at this point. But do you see that as a bright spot, when it comes to Nigeria's supply chain, with what we've seen so far, playing out with PMS, even though the prices are still quite elevated, we're seeing some drawdowns, here and there, depending on which filling station you're buying from?
I think the advent of private refineries is a good, harbinger for the industry as a whole, right? What then happens is that because of competition, right, a lot of people will be trying to get market share. And due to this competition, consumers will get the best. And so you would continue to see that for retailers or for marketers of petroleum products who want to sell the products and who want to attract more customers to their depots or their filling stations, right? That reduced price will now become the name of the game. And so they would use that to funnel more people. And by that, well, a lot of people will then be able to take advantage of these prices. What we've noticed in Nigeria is that a lot of the times when these prices go up, they hardly tend to come down, right? The hope is that with reduced petroleum prices, and petroleum prices in Nigeria generally affects everything across the board. So, from the price of food in the market to school fees, you'll be surprised what even people that sell yam will tell you is because of fuel price and all of that. So the hope is that with more competition in that space, more modular refineries coming up, more price drops in fuel, right, we'll see a downward trend in the general inflationary trend.
All right, talking about the inflationary trend there, we're seeing the central bank, they had their first rate setting meeting in 2025, and it was a hold. I'm guessing, analysts were quite, it was some kind of consensus, that, after the rebase data, the MPC, they would definitely hold to, understand what's really playing out so far. But the rates are still quite elevated. What are you seeing, when it comes to supply chain credit? How are we seeing, or have, investors or participants been able to absorb this high interest rate environment, and maybe the whole, there's some kind of relief?
So what we've generally seen is that due to these rates, right, there has been reduced liquidity in the markets, right? So it's been more difficult for businesses to access credit from your normal providers of credit. So I'm talking about the banks or merchant banks and investment house. So we've seen an upsurge basically of private credits, right, where people are, as opposed to giving loans out, right, at an annual rate, people are looking at supply chain cycles and saying, I can, lend you money over the period where you need to fulfill your order that comes in. So we're looking at anything between 60 to 90 days cycle. And so what you see there is that because of the inability to access credit from a lot of the major financial institutions, private credit has come in, and that is where actually vendor credit, plays a pivotal role. We can look at providing credit, at reduced rates, right, that sort of match your payment cycle in such a way that you are not left out of the market and you're still able to provide services as much as possible.
All right, definitely we'll keep seeing to see how what plays out when it comes to interest rates, going forward. But, let's talk about innovations now, because, definitely we know situations can be tight, but, those kind of tight situations somehow, bring innovations. What trends are you seeing so far when it comes to supply chain management in Nigeria?
So the major one that would jump out is B2B marketplaces. A lot of companies are sort of eliminating the middleman, right? So you see direct business to businesses from where manufacturers are going directly to the providers of inputs where they need particular inputs. You also have that in the digital marketplaces where platforms can help small businesses source goods directly from manufacturers, as opposed to having a middleman who would be in charge of transportation, which also adds an added cost. So what you see now is platforms are, helping businesses to get directly from manufacturers, right? We've seen embedded finance solutions, right? Supply chain fintechs such as ours, right? We offer those working capital facilities for people. So not just working capital, invoice discounting, LPOs. And with that, you are able to, meet up your orders as much as possible without having to worry about when next they are going to pay you or if the payment is going to be delayed, because that source of funding is also there. There has been an upward trend in the use of technology, AI, right, to analyze historical data and predict demand. This has come in handy, right? A lot of the tools that we have now, and a lot of the major players have tools that have helped that are helping us in this space, to analyze this data. So you talk of Claude, you talk of OpenAI, even Google's Gemini, right, plays a significant role in helping us do this. We've also seen localized sourcing and manufacturing previously, where people were going out of the country to look for raw materials, right? Nigerian companies have started looking inwards, right? And I've also done some of them have done some backward integration to ensure that their inputs are sourced locally and on time, so that there is no break in their manufacturing processes. And then we've seen instances where there have been collaboration and shared infrastructure where businesses are trying to reduce overhead costs by collaborating with businesses who are in the same sector, right? And that has helped across board. So, for example, is a company like Shuttlers in mobility, where they sort of do like a cab share, or you can say a bus share for companies or for people who are going in the same direction. E-commerce financing, right? Companies like Konga, who have embedded financing onto their platform. So where vendor credit is their major finance, and then the providers of the products on Konga can access financing so that they can stock up on their products and then be able to sell at a higher rate than before if they had to go to the banks. So those are some of the things that we've seen in the industry so far, and it looks like as people continue to innovate, we're going to see more and more of these strategies come out to play.
All right, definitely be looking out to see how they come out and navigate most of what's playing out in these economies, especially in Africa, with high interest rates and a weak currency. Definitely not easy to navigate all of that. But thank you so much. That was Oluwatoyin Olaoye, is the Chief Risk Officer at Vendor Credit, joining me from the UK. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you very much, Ladi.
All right, so earlier we had the presence of Tolulope Tamuka, Chief of Governmental Relations in Africa and UN Global Impact, and John McQuay had a sit down with her to discuss the expected impact of most of the aids we're seeing being cut off, from most of the developed nations coming into Africa. Take a listen to see what to expect and how to navigate this.
The United Nations continues to see Africa as an important region and continues to further its work in Africa despite present challenges. Of course, Africa has always had its challenges, conflict, economic issues, but what we are noticing is that Africa is rising, and the economic potential of Africa is what we want to connect into as the UN Global Compact, and we see so many opportunities that we can really showcase the brilliant work that the continent is doing and really help drive those economic opportunities on the continent. As you mentioned, energy is a big piece, and domestically there's a lot of efforts that are happening. It's been a pleasure, absolute pleasure, being here in Lagos and seeing the huge potential that the Lagos state, the Nigerian government, and indeed the African continent is making, coming together to drive economic access for the continent. Of course, it's not without challenges due to the current geopolitical context. However, what we want to bring to Africa through the UN Global Compact role to ensure that we're connecting key stakeholders to problem solve towards driving energy access for Africans on the continent. That's just one piece out of the puzzle that we're trying to solve as the UN. We're also looking at digital transformation, digital access, and Africa is at the forefront of this effort. Young Africans, including here in Nigeria, really advancing in the fintech area and so many more. AI is really here. Africans are taking advantage of that, and we want to ensure that the key tools that Africa needs to leap into the next century are available so that that leap can become a reality, particularly for the upcoming generation.
So you've been in Nigeria and you've met members of the business community. What do we expect out of that?
Right. We've had really exciting meetings with the business community. We see the efforts that they're making to drive sustainability. They're in our membership. We are the biggest business sustainability network that exists globally. We have over 25,000 companies within our fold. And in Africa, companies are growing. We have over 1,500 companies, both from the large multinational companies companies with operations across Africa, and also companies that are SMEs really being part of our network. And what we are seeing from businesses and hearing is that they want to do more domestically, but they want to connect to international players. We're hearing they want to make South-South connections. So from businesses in China, in the Middle East, across the continent, they see that the connection points are even more important now than ever before. And what they need is a platform that will bring these stakeholders together, and that's where we come in, because we provide a platform to convene and to connect, and as well as to catalyze, which really is our motto. And we do that through the Global Africa Business Initiative. It's been around for 3 years now. We're going into our 4th year, and we've become world-class, a premier gathering, well-known across the world, because we bring global business leaders to connect with African business leaders and to drive change in so many critical areas, including climate action. Somebody has to do the work, and Africans are up to the task.
So talking about Gabi now and these your meetings, what's the strategy? Because you could be dealing with Nigeria, and the individuals or the small companies or businesses may not feel your impact. So what's the strategy for you to really get out there and people know that you're in existence in the country?
Exactly. So we have a 3-pronged strategy. One is for us to come together as the UN, and what we do is to bring other UN partners together. So as you mentioned, energy, C4All is championing energy, and they now fold in the Gabi initiative. UNDP, the ECA, Economic Commission for Africa, we're working together, and that's really a unique platform. We're not working in isolation, but bringing our comparative advantage as the UN together through this Gabi platform. So that's really an important piece that we bring in. We also have the partnership with the African Union, and we are working to also achieve the African Union's priorities. The transitions happened very recently, and Gabi is one of the platforms that will help them advance the 2063 agenda. But more importantly, what we are doing is to partner with key stakeholders, including yourselves in the media, to really amplify efforts that bring to scale initiatives that can drive sustainability and continent. So right from innovative work that's happening in food systems, in education, we really showcase through our platform those initiatives, and hope that global business leaders will see the potential and the opportunity and connect to these initiatives and bring them to light. What we want to stop is stop talking. We want to bring about action, and that's what we focus on at Gabi.
And so
was Tolupe Tamoka, the Chief of Governmental Relations and Africa for UN Global Impact, with a conversation earlier with Ini John Mekwa. Talking about Ini John Mekwa, we have her here to give us what's playing out in the global economies that we track at this point. Good to have you, Ini. Happy New Week, happy new month. Happy new day. What's playing out so far?
Well,
it was quite an interesting weekend.
Yes,
We're seeing the impact on markets that are awake.
Yeah, I have to tell you, Ladi, when I was watching that video, obviously it's the video of President Trump, President Zelensky, and Vice President Vance.
Right.
I mean, I was on the edge of my chair.
Yes.
Because, I didn't know where the fire was going to come out from.
Yes, exactly.
And some naughty social media individuals, they elaborated it. I don't know if you saw where they were now physical.
Yeah, AI is just
that
incredible.
Wasn't true at all.
It wasn't
that was
true.
not true.
It's
that was
artificial
part of
intelligence at play again.
Yes. Yeah, but
they can actually make me and you fight right now.
I know, right? We have to be very careful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But that meeting was supposed to give us more hope.
Right.
For peace between Russia and Ukraine, but we saw that it went the other way.
Yeah, we didn't make headway at that meeting.
Yeah, but I've seen somewhere where President Zelensky is set to be saying that if invited again, he would go back to the Oval Office. But
maybe not with a suit, but Who knows?
Ladi, I will talk about the outfits.
No, we're not going to talk about
I will not.
Yeah.
All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the global news segment of Business Morning. We start in China, where the factory activity expanded at the fastest in 3 months to 50.8 in February. A private sector survey showed that many millions of migrant workers are returning to work after an extended Lunar New Year holiday, and the seasonal adjusted S&P Global, there's indexes for manufacturing purchasing managers index. It beat polls forecast at 50.3, also accelerating from 50.1 in January and 50.5 last December. The private sector manufacturing PMI has stayed above the 50 threshold, which we know is the positive part and separates expansion from contraction since last October. And this private survey reading on Monday followed the official manufacturing PMI that was released on Saturday, which also shows that China's February factory activity expanded at its fastest pace since November. The official PMI rose to 50.2 in February from 49.1 in January, this according to the National Bureau of Statistics. The non-manufacturing PMI, which includes services and construction, also climbed to 50.4 from 50.2 in January. And then we move to Turkey, where annual inflation dipped below 40% in February ahead of an anticipated interest rate cut this week. Inflation slowed to 39.1% from 42.1% the prior month, according to State Statistics Agency. And the median forecast in a survey of analysts shows that it's supposed to be 39.9. Meanwhile, Turkey's economy grew 3% year on year in the last fourth quarter of 2024, taking full year growth to 3.2%. Driven primarily by domestic demand, and that surpassed forecasts despite the weight of high interest rate. The data also suggests that Turkey, which experienced a technical recession as of the third quarter of 2024 because of 2 consecutive contractions, returned to the positive quarterly gross domestic product growth in the last quarter of that year, 2024. Now, Switzerland is next on our horizon, and Switzerland's national benchmark for mortgage costs dropped to the level it had been before global inflation surge, potentially setting up tenants on the country's high-price housing market for rent cuts. Well, after increases in line with interest rates, the reference interest rate for rent is now set at 1.5%. That's down from 1.75%. And the Federal Office of Housing said this, that under Swiss law, a benchmark decrease by 0.25 percentage point enables tenants to demand a rent cut by 3%. Isn't that good news? Can it happen in Nigeria? And now, yes, so we're back to President Trump. He's announced the creation of a strategic crypto reserve that will include Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP, Solana's, and Sol token, Cardano, and a whole lot more. This is the first time that President Trump has specified his support for a crypto reserve versus a stockpile. And many crypto investors feel strongly that a crypto reserve should hold only Bitcoin, while some reject the idea of a reserve holding digital assets altogether. Analysts do believe that this U.S. crypto reserve will elevate the industry. And we saw the movement over the weekend, just in case you saw how Bitcoin went from, I think by Friday it's about 79, 80, 81, and now is back to, I believe, 90. That's because of this announcement by President Trump. Now let's head to the United Kingdom and see what's going on there. Of course, after that very dramatic meeting on Friday, the weekend was filled with meetings, and Prime Minister was at the middle of it. So one of the things that the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom did was to host allies for security talks in London, and giving some advice to Europe on security and all of that. Let's have my colleague from London, Juliana, joining us to give us the details of some of this. Hi, Juliana. Happy New Week. Good morning. So what is the UK saying after that explosive meeting in the Oval Office.
Good morning, Inni. Yes, it was. It was terribly explosive, and I think European leaders, particularly Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, is still trying to delicately balance how this ceasefire, this peace between Ukraine and Russia will pan out over the next couple of days with America at the center of it. I think that was pretty clear during discussions yesterday at Lancaster House, as you made reference to, the Prime Minister hosting, I believe, 18 European leaders, including the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, former Dutch Prime Minister, and as well as Justin Trudeau, the outgoing Canadian Prime Minister, all showing total and complete solidarity to President Volodymyr Zelensky, who, as you said, was caught up in a pretty bruising public bust-up at the Oval Office on Friday. I think a lot of European leaders were nervous, of course, about this meeting. There had been tensions bubbling beneath the surface on social media, and we had hoped that perhaps Macron and Sir Keir Starmer had kind of appeased Donald Trump, but that wasn't the case. So Sir Keir Starmer had and played a really pivotal role this weekend. I think, Sir Keir Starmer has come out of this situation leader of the pack, really. And who would have thought that a couple of weeks ago, when, the US president was making such, garish statements about Ukraine and Russia, we thought that the US would be central and key in securing peace. But it appears that isn't the case. The grown-up in the room has definitely been Sir Keir Starmer. He pledged yesterday as well during that historic meeting in Lancaster House, £1.6 billion to fund 5,000 missiles. All is to be relayed in the Palace of Westminster, in Parliament today at 4:00. So it's still quite dicey. I think a lot of people are still reflecting on what has been just, totally world-changing events over the past couple of days. But yes, certainly Britain, centre of the pack, leading these peace negotiations. And really important to point out, Inni, just lastly, that Britain did announce yesterday that it is now going to lead these Ukrainian peace discussions, not the United States of America.
Well, we hope that would reduce the tension and perhaps bring more objectivity to it. But I hope it will not be to the detriment of the British people. We know there's increase in defense spending. Now we see train fare has increased. I hope it's not the people paying for some of these things.
Well, of course, I think let's go on to the train fares. As you said, 4.6% increase. I think most Brits are used to an increase in public transport at the beginning of the year. It's something that the government tend to do. Typically, would see the increase in January. It's been delayed slightly. We have heard from the Transport Minister this morning saying that basically the Labour government inherited a out-of-date, defunct British transport system that is in desperate need of privatisation and more investment. And I think that's what people are hoping. If you are unfortunate to live outside of the British capital, this increase does affect you and impacts you annually by hundreds of pounds a year. And even though it's inevitable that rise will come, what you do want and expect is a service that runs and is efficient. And I think, unfortunately, British commuters are used to that not being the case. So let's see if the Labour government can turn that around.
Well, we'll see. But Juliana, just briefly, because we're almost out of time, do we have important data to expect this week?
This week, I think all eyes are going to be on Washington and what happens with these discussions with Ukraine. I do believe we are expecting some retail data at the end of the week, but I think, what Sir Keir Starmer has to say at Westminster today is going to reverberate across geopolitics.
All right. We'll certainly be following that story. Thank you so much, Juliana, and do have a great week.
Thank you, Annie. You too.
All right, Ladi. So, Prime Minister Keir Starmer is, as Juliana has brought up, leading the pack now,
right.
and we hope it to be less sensational,
emotional,
and more results.
Yes, more results for peace.
That's what we're looking for.
For peace sake, going forward, and I'm sure investors will be looking out for what's playing out with these talks. But thank you so much, Annie, for giving us what's playing on the global scene now. So that's it. That's the first one for this week. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to watch out for most of the geopolitics and economic data that will be coming out this week and how that's going to affect your portfolio. Thank you for watching. I'm Ladi Williams from me and the team right here at Channels HQ. It's bye for now.